For those of you whom I don't know, my name is Chantal Warner. I'm together with my colleague Beatrice Dupuis, who started us off this morning, one of the two co-directors of AZCALL, and also one of the co-organizers for this event. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our final presenter of the day, Dr. Heather Lotherington. Heather is professor of multilingual education at York University, where she's faculty in both education and in the Department of Linguistics and Applied Linguistics. This dual departmental position reflects her research interests very well, which cross multi and plurilingual education, multiliteracies, pedagogies, and this is the focus of her 2011 monograph, Pedagogy of Multiliteracies, Rewriting Goldilocks, and I know some of you in the room are very interested in this topic, so that's a book recommendation. Yes. In addition, and probably most directly relevant to our symposium today, she's interested in language, literacy, and technology. And her most recent research has focused on digital communicative competence. And here I'd like to highlight also another recent article with Nathalie Ronda from the 2014 Calico volume, Digital Literacies in Foreign and Second Language Education. Another strand of Heather's current research examines how literacies in the post-human spectrum can be applied to language learning, and that's, I think, part of the topic for her talk today. From multiliteracies to posthumanism, language, literacy, education, and society in a digital crossroads. Please join me in welcoming Heather Lotherington.
Thank you very, very much, Chantal. Good afternoon. Bonjour tout le monde, buenos dias, guten tag, buonasera, and I think those are the languages that I heard you sort of throw around this morning. So hi to everybody, and thank you. I mean, a really very big thank you for inviting me to this really wonderful forum. Is this on okay? Doing what it's supposed to do? Okay, right. I have a tendency to sort of not get pinned behind the podium. I'll get lost here anyhow. You won't see me. I'm only about like 2 inches taller than it. But anyhow, here I am. I'm particularly interested in the fusion nature. It's doing funny things, isn't it? Thank you. All right, good. The fusion nature of this symposium. And I thought it might be sort of wise to give you a little wee bit of my history. I actually started my career 40 years ago as an ESL teacher. So it was actually exactly 40 years ago. Really. And I went into teaching English as a second language, and then I taught other people how to teach English as a second language, and then I got horrified about how English was really steamrolling the world. And so I jumped ship and went into multilingual education. But as I did that, I realized that the people I was following around, and at this point I was in Melbourne, Australia, were doing things that I never thought of as language or literacy. We were calling it biliteracy at the time. It was the era of the New London group, many of whom are from Australia. Many of them really sort of can track themselves to Melbourne too. And we were talking about as biliteracy, they were talking about as multiliteracies, and I started just to think about that. And that was 20 years ago. So I haven't been able to separate technology and languages for the last 2 decades, and so I just have to kind of get that out there. So I've got this organized into 3 bits. The first one is kind of epistemological turf, because it seems to me that we're all kind of colleagues here. We're all working with the same sort of agenda if you look big enough, and so I wanted to try to do that. Then I'm going to talk about From Multiliteracies, which was my early work in Canada, at least back home for me in Canada, looking at, well, I'll tell you about what we did in an elementary school. And then I'm going to look at posthumanism. I'm going to look at work that I'm doing in MAL right now, Mobile Assisted Language Learning, which is sort of an offspring of CALL, although both are kind of unfortunately named. Okay, so here we go. We start out with, you know, this wonderful circuit de communication of 1916 from Ferdinand de Saussure. This is communication, you know. Okay, so we start out with this idea, language is a medium for human communication. They go kind of from the axiomatic to the itchy. Humans have an innate capacity for languages, and that must be made plural, And there are many people around talking about the fact that human language capability is multilingual from the get-go, and that we've had a kind of aberration in history when we've taken a look at monolingualism as if it were something that was normal. But it wasn't before about 150 years ago, and it's not really true. Now, it wasn't true in the meantime either. In the kind of interim period, we just didn't think that way. Languages can be materialized in different technical media, as can non-linguistic communication. Digitally mediated communication facilitates and extends multimodality and introduces novel conventions. Digitally networked communication enables cognitive distribution. Socio-technical evolution outstrips educational policy and practice. Okay, let me sort of take those apart just a little wee bit. Right, okay, so this should be fairly common ground, that language is a medium for human communication. I've put two non-human communicators into this slide. So you're looking at my Siri, which I've got programmed into French right now, and so when I talk to Siri, I have to use French. What it actually does is make me not have very many questions for Siri, but nonetheless, that is what I did. And I've also got Kanzi here. You probably know Kanzi. I mean, maybe not. I can't even say personally, haha. You know, but you know him from the really wonderful work of Sue Savage-Rumbaugh. And Kanzi actually is communicating via a literate convention. So this is an ape that's literate and has learned human language. Okay, so humans have an innate capacity for languages. I actually didn't think that was going to be hard until on the way down here, I started reading Charles Taylor's The Language Animal, in which that's one of the very first things he says, is that language is not innate. And I thought, oh, well, I guess I have to read a little more here. More or less common ground. Okay. Languages can be materialized in different technical media. We call this literacy, basically. And I've got stuff here that you'll recognize. For instance, on the right, I have a little book that children at Joyce did, which was a rewrite of the Three Billy Goat Scruff. This is a book. This is a picture of the book. It's done in this one is done in 2 languages. We've customized all resources so that they use the languages of the children, as well as the language of the medium of education, English. And sometimes we've got mixtures of languages in there too, and we've got another thing in there too, which is a picture. And we've got all of that together in what would be considered a pretty traditional resource. Now on the left is a macaque, and you may have seen this on YouTube. This was a macaque that stole a photographer's camera and did a selfie. Now I don't know very much about macaques, but I'm not sure whether they smile in this kind of family portrait kind of way this one did, you know, which kind of, you recognize that smile, don't you? You know, this is, okay, Grandpa, we're going to take a picture now, you know, and here we go. And so I thought it was very interesting about the conventions in which you encode yourself in the media of today, human or not. Okay, we get into sort of bumpy ground here. Digitally mediated communication facilitates and extends multimodality and introduces novel conventions. Okay, so I haven't heard a lot of this today. I've heard print conventions as normative in a number of different ways. So I don't know what your take is on the Twitter novel that I have here, that I think is really quite interesting. And I also think of it as being conventionally written in tweet syntax. You know, Twitter has its own syntax. And the spelling conventions I did quite a bit of work on about a decade ago. And they are really conventionalized for texting now. I mean, there's a rationale behind things. They're not ad hoc in any way, shape, or form. So they can't be said to be wrong. They can just be said to be in a different medium. Now, I've got above it something that would be called invented spelling, and it's a text that's over 20 years old. And you look at it, and this one is a little girl, and she's done kind of a calendar entry with a little story above it. And there was a time when we would look at this, we'd bring this into school and take a look at now what they have to learn and how to sort of turn this into normative spelling. So that would have been looked at in terms of this spelling is wrong, and it's, it's a kid trying to, isn't that nice sort of thing. Although there were always alternative approaches to looking at invented spelling, as opposed to the one underneath, which is looked upon as being a novel by a novelist in a particular medium using the conventions of the medium. So that's kind of changed quite a bit. The multimodality that's facilitated as well, we can see a little bit better in the Memrise clip that I've got right here. I don't know how much teaching and learning online of languages you do, but I guess I'm going to find out very soon. I mean, on your phones for yourself. And this was, I started an assignment with one of my classes, and we all downloaded these apps, and I downloaded them all, and so I had all of this stuff coming. My email was plugged up by, we haven't seen you in Chinese lately, where is your next Italian lesson, and things like this. So I had to back out of a bunch of them. But when you take a look at the possibilities for communication here, they get quite interesting. Okay, then we get into quicksand. All right, so digitally networked communication enables cognitive distribution. Well, yeah, I mean, that's, you're not going to question that. But it also changes what we think of, and that's that collaborative individual moment right there, as being kind of normal learning, normal teaching, normal language, normal communication, normal literacy. And I have two pictures at the bottom. On the left is a shot from for me, grade 4, for you, 4th grade, okay. Classroom, elementary classroom, in which they've done a project, and I think I'm going to tell you more about that. I'll tell you more at the time. It was an anti-Islamophobia sort of project, and so everybody had to dress, and for many of them, cross-dress for this particular project. But they're facing each other. What they did, which I'll tell you more about later, was constructed as a whole. This class, incidentally, is entirely special education. And it's a fabulous project they did. Beside it is a picture from the school I graduated from, Moncton High School. No, you don't know where that is. No, don't worry about it. It isn't my year, but it might as well be, because it's absolutely, if you just change those faces, we all look like that. We looked exactly like that. We faced towards the front. We put our hands in our laps. We all tried to learn to do, walking in our own steps, exactly the right thing to do for somebody else. That's really manifestly different. Just look at the positioning of what can happen with just even a kind of crowdsourcing on a very small basis. And then the last one that I don't think you're going to disagree with, socio-technical evolution outstrips educational policy and practice. And I'm going to come back to those 6 at the end, but to kind of jump into the research that I can talk best about, I guess, we're going to go to Joyce Public School in Northwest Toronto. And we're going to take the From Multiliteracies portion. So I was following very much the work of the New London group and their theorizing of multiliteracies, in which really there were, at least in my reading, there were sort of 2 big things to think about. One, given that literacy was considered to be, no matter where you were, in a kind of dominant language, nobody ever makes kind of vernaculars, even if you can actually write them down, good enough to read, which is a huge problem. I mean, that was English, when you go back to the time of the Norman Conquest. Who spoke English? Goat herds, milkmaids. The French kings couldn't be bothered to, thereby explaining why we have, 2 words for the animal and then the meat we eat. Anyhow, I'm off track. So let me come back to Joyce Public School. So we've got 2 things to think about. We've got to think about global cultural flows and how that's really morphed classrooms. And we have to think about so-called new technologies, which is what people were thinking about 20 years ago. They're still kind of new, but all right. So here's the context. This is Toronto. It's a large city. It's the largest in Canada. The Greater Toronto area is about 6 million people, so there's lots of folks there. The country, as you know, is officially bilingual, English and French, but I took you a little streetscape here, a little linguistic landscape of North Yonge Street. This is very typical of streetscapes all over Toronto, except the languages will change. In this particular streetscape, and I even got some snow in there for you, I've got Farsi, Korean, Chinese, and English, and that is only half of a little strip mall. Still within the borders of the city proper of Toronto. We haven't even gone to the suburbs yet. So the people of Toronto reflect the multiculturalism policy of 1971, and Canada was the first country in the world to make this legal. We're unfortunately still kind of sitting around in 1971 in our thinking, despite the fact that it was revised in 1988, when I'm not really sure what the revisions were. I don't think that we've moved on enough in terms of thinking of multiculturalism as superdiversity, which is unquestionably the face of Toronto. But our education runs on this bilingual stuff. So this gives us this kind of thing. You know, we have all the official stuff in schools and so forth in English and French. Less than 2% of Torontonians speak French. We have... not sure I can pull up a figure right now, but we have a whole small city of Chinese speakers in Toronto. We'd be able to make a reasonable sized city out of the number of people who speak just Mandarin, you know, in the city of Toronto. So there's a mismatch there. So these two signs are from Joyce Public School. This is something saying that you're supposed to wait at the, or you go through those particular doors, right? And then this one comes from for me, washroom, for you, restroom. Sorry, I keep hearing all these words and thinking, I don't have the same word for this. Anyhow, where you wash your hands and go to the bathroom, that's the place. And so it's all these different languages. And that is the kind of thing that we find around all over the place. And here's a classroom. This is Nikki Huang in the background, who's one of the teachers. So we're really used to this in Toronto. We're used to working with massively multicultural populations. This, for me, is normal. And this is, I think one of the things that we can be credited with, I think we've done many things sort of badly, but we can be credited with sort of really engaging people who have come into Canada, and they come into the country and they do rise through the ranks, and your dentist is from, you know, Japan, and your physiotherapist is from Nigeria, and so on and so forth. This is just kind of, I think we've done this okay. So here's the kids, so here's the problem. They go into school, school's in English, they have to learn French, but they come in with 16 different languages in one classroom. So, you know, this is the sort of thing that we had to work with. So this is, I have to take you back to the very turn of the century, and the work that I started to do here was in 2002. These were the guides, the curricular guides for elementary school. Actually, 2006 has already been revised by the time I put it here. These are still the guides. And you have language, which means English language and literacy are elided. They're the same thing, somehow. I am going to find a place to kind of question that real big time. And behind it, we have English as a second language and English literacy development, both kind of elided. Like, you guys weren't doing this stuff well, we're going to put you into this group, remedial sort of group. So we have this problem that literacy is language written down, and that equals English. Alternatively, it can equal French, but it's not going to equal Urdu. It's not going to equal Cantonese, and so on and so forth. So this is a real problem, because really we're there to sort of educate children, and you have to start from a realistic place. So I will spare you the really early days, although they were really fun. Of working with the principal, Cheryl Page, at Joyce Public School. This is in a neighborhood of 90% plus immigrants, very high or low, well, they're poor, however you want to put that. And, you know, it's a 60s school, so it's not a school that's well kind of endowed with. We have public schools in Toronto that have sports tracks and swimming pools and so forth because they were built in a richer era. This is not the case with Joyce Public School. And we began by trying to get kids inside the materials they were reading to see if we could get them to give their cultural perspective, and we started by rewriting Goldilocks. And it got really interesting. So it was really an collaborative, well, all action research is collaborative, but it was a collaborative, participatory action research project that went for a decade. And it was very, we got good funding for a lot of it. The funding paid for things like supply teachers so that we could meet together. And we finally kind of worked this into a part of the school and a part of the school day so that they saw it as a kind of inbuilt professional development. I saw it as a theory-practice interface. And I'm just going to shorthand the questions that we kind of were pursuing because they were elaborated and reiterated as we went on and learned more. And basically we were asking right from the get-go, what is literacy in the 21st century? What does this mean? How is literacy constituted and how is it performed? The pedagogical questions that are so important. How can we teach and assess language and literacy as contemporary social practice in a digitally embedded, super diverse urban context, ergo home? And socio-political questions, and I really need help with this one. How do we lobby educational policymakers to anticipate and accommodate rapidly changing literacy practices? And anything you can do to help me see the light on this one is like so welcome. We got all kinds of stuff about how to work with the pedagogy of it. There's plenty of folks here with really interesting ideas about literacy in the 21st century. Policy piece, not so much. Okay, so we ended up with something that was very much project-based. We took subjects out of their silos. You know that picture, Moncton High, everybody sitting forward, everything separated? We kind of, you know, really slashed that whole mindset, which pervades schooling in many ways. And the teachers worked together, the kids worked together. We had cross-age groups doing projects. One of them, for instance, we had grade 2 and kindergarten, and the teachers, of course, thought that the grade 2s are going to help the kindergarten kids, and the kindergarten kids, once they got the hang of what was going on, came out with wonderful constructive criticism for the grade 2 children on what they were doing. So we saw lots of really interesting things happen with that. It was very experiential. We pulled the subjects out. They made projects that took a year. They took a year. It's really important to think about that there was a long time span. This isn't something you do in a 2-week block and you're through. So at the very least, they would take between 4 and 6 months. And at the most, the school year, which is 10 months, basically. More or less. Okay, so I've got a few pictures here. The one in the right-hand corner is a very old picture, actually, and it's kids learning music in a MIDI lab. And this was a music and math fusion. It wasn't part of the work that we were doing in what all the teachers got to call the Multiliteracies project, although, quite frankly, I moved into multimodality and multimodal literacies fairly as part of the theory to practice sort of learning curve for myself because I saw the limitations and the vagueness in multiliteracies. Nonetheless, that was their name for it, so that's just fine. So they were doing work like this before I even got there. They had invested in technology, so to speak, as something to sort of help these kids because they didn't have much else to kind of help them. It really had to come from inside. And I worked with this wonderful principal, too, everybody's won multiple awards having to do with this school. During the period we worked together, it's changed very much. And her aim was to make this the best school in the world. This was not to be a good school, a great school, a good school in Toronto, the best school in Toronto, which is a lot of schools. It was to be the best in the world. And so I worked with someone who was just so, you know, such a go-getter. It was great. In the left-hand picture, we've got kids. We were working on the concept of beauty. And this one went across the junior classes, which is 4, 5, and 6, or 4th, 5th, and 6th grades in your parlance. And these kids were doing what is beautiful, and almost all of the projects in the junior spectrum came out of social justice projects. It's, you know, this is, not only were there teachers who were particularly sort of oriented that way, but it's also a very Canadian sort of way to think. And so we were looking at the idea of beauty and ideals of beauty, and one of the teachers was very distraught because one of the kids in her class had said she wasn't beautiful, she was too dark, and her mother kept telling her she was too dark to be beautiful. She'd come originally from Trinidad. So, had the teacher. And boy, she wasn't going to let that one pass muster at all. And so we started on this ideal of beauty. I think the particular books that were included there included for the younger kids Cinderella, and looking at beauty and the shoe size and all that kind of stuff. Anyhow, this particular one was looking at what's beautiful in different sensory modalities. So it's what you hear that's beautiful, it's what you touch that's beautiful, it's what you smell that's beautiful. And these guys are doing taste. So they're doing taste in terms of what it looks like, what it tastes like, and so on and so forth. I'm going to show you a little clip from the project that the special ed kids did, where they read the novel The Breadwinner, which is, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this. It's a novel about a little girl in Afghanistan whose father is taken away by the Taliban. She's left with her mother, and they're going to starve unless she goes out and gets work. So she cross-dresses as a boy, enters Afghani society at risk of her life, you know, and so on and so forth. And and that's what the novel is about. These kids are 8, 9 years old, and all of them have learning difficulties of one sort or another that's earned them a little rap sheet to put them in special ed. So what they did is they read it. That takes really a long time, and they discussed it, and so on and so forth. And they chose a character who was not well developed from this particular novel. And they wrote a backstory for her. So this is like, for those, many people here are very entrenched in the literary world, this is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And that's a spoof that comes out of those characters going missing in a Shakespearean play. Okay, so here is the TV show they did. They've costumed, they're doing this one ad hoc. It's based on an Oprah kind of model, and they're interviewing the window woman. They've done a backstory. They've filmed it. They've spliced the film together. They've done the video editing, and
in those programs that are going to come with it, I'm right about Salira, and my mom's going to come with it.
On the women's show, we are going to interview the window woman. Hi, I am going to interview you because I feel like I don't know much about you, because your life is so rich and your life is so exciting, and I need to ask you some questions. How old are you?
I'm 38.
Tell me about your life.
I was born in Jalal-Dan, and as a young girl, I always wanted to be a seamstress, like all the other women in my family were seamstresses.
so there's just a little clip from it. So these, in fact, I was having a conversation earlier. David, you were telling me, right, about the kids who had done this project with Steven Spielberg and then gone on and failed English. Was it you? So, well, yes, right, had this car. And I thought immediately of these kids who are in there because they're considered failures, you know, through the tests. They did this wonderful creative work, and we found when we lifted the curriculum is supposed to be a floor, a ceiling, right? Standards, the whole concept of standards, but when you lift the floor, you lift the ceiling as well, and the things that kids did were absolutely wonderful. So here's what we did. This is the sort of real condensed form. We had systemic language education. We had lots of different ways of learning French, all kinds of different ways to do that. At the high school level, we have something called international languages. But if you're not at the high school level, and if they don't happen to have German at your high school level, then they have Spanish, so that's what you get, you know, kind of thing. There's not a lot of breadth there. We have extracurricular language education. We have heritage language education, which is also called international languages, although these international languages are spoken on the block. And at this particular school, they had Vietnamese and Cantonese and after-school continuing education. Those teachers do not get the same resources. They don't have the same time. They can't interact with the teachers in school. And so I don't find this a very factory solution. So what we did is we did socially situated programmatic language education. And what we had was collaborative project-based educational spaces that welcome plurilingual inclusion. Plurilingualism meaning, and I go back to a number of French scholars here on plurilingualism, but you're looking at the individual as the unit, not the language. And so what you've got is the kind of partitive language capabilities we all have, everybody. There wouldn't be one person sitting here who is not capable of reading their way through an incredibly international menu. I promise you that much. You know, and you find that you've got all kinds of capabilities from lots of other languages that your immediate response is, well, no, I don't speak that. You know, and people ask me if I speak French, I think, oh, my rotten French, are you kidding? But actually, you know, we looked at it a different way, which said, well, I speak some French, let's take a look at what I can add, sort of thing. And so a lot of the kids feel, as children do in schools that you're familiar with, that they really have to learn English. They have to speak English. Their parents brought them there because they have to learn English. And that's what's important. It's not important that they continue to speak Tamil or Turkish or whatever it is. We beg to differ on many, many, many grounds. One of them is, this is a global society, you know. They're already global. They've come to us from the world. Why are we minimizing that world? Why would you do that? Why would you throw out this knowledge? That's just kind of dumb to do that. So we welcome plurilingual inclusion, and that brought families in as well, and it made spaces, and it started to tear down the school walls. And so we've got lots of linguistically customized resources, and we used all kinds of different communities. Wherever we could find them, we have the local community, we have all kinds of digital ways of getting help. We found it more helpful to use digital communication to hook into people rather than to use programs, although they're getting better and better, but they're kind of scary in some ways, because you get really hilariously awful translations and things like that. And besides, you know, it's that moment again, is language human or not, and where do you sit there? The project that I have a little collage of is called Walking with My Kokum. Kokum is the Cree word for grandmother. And this was a project done in Rose and Farah's grade 3. So their class is in the examination year for these horrible standardized tests that we have that test the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Like, thank you, 19th century. Just so wonderful still to be looking at that. Okay, so they looked at this, and this was an Aboriginal learning unit. So they went to the Aboriginal Learning Center in Toronto, and they did all kinds of different really fun stuff with a number of Indigenous folks who are living in Toronto. And they got a storyteller who came into the classroom, and she was a Cree storyteller, and she made a story for them. And so her story was Walking with My Kokum. So they made a book of their story, and they used their own motifs that they'd learned to do, having learned some of the local Indigenous forms of motif making and so forth. And they collaged them, put them together, and they worked with an artist as well who came from the Aboriginal Learning Center. And they then took their stories home that had a number of, that were beautiful plurilingual resources that had Cree strewn within, which by that time they understood. Kokum was a kokum, she was a grandmother, and Nichichim was a grandson, and so on and so forth. And they went back to their parents who spoke Vietnamese and Hmong and Oromo and so on and so forth, and they got a glossary so they could have a trilingual glossary. So they could bring pre-colonialism, colonialism, and post-colonialism, which of course were not the terms that anybody used, but that's basically what happened in the same story that they wrote. And so that it sort of took those walls down between the old them and us sort of stuff, and there's a lot of them and using in there. We learned a lot in the process. I'm going to read, I think, turn to my text, if I can find the right page. For this one, because we just learned so many things that to me just seem normal. The idea that reading precedes writing is ridiculous. We had kids programming their way into stories and learning to read from their own stories that they programmed in there. They're not discrete in any way, shape, or form. Literacy does not mean only in English or only in language. 4 skills, oh, it's been so long that I've been trying to sort of shove that one in the garbage can, and I still get it coming back at me. Non-official languages are understood in terms of heritage. No way. I'm really interested in Chinese, really interested in it, and I've studied it a number of times. I don't have any Chinese background. Does that mean that I can't do that? That doesn't make any sense. Only official languages recognized and valid in school. That takes a lot of work because the school doors often mean drop your language here and then walk into this environment. And that took a lot of work to change it. And some of that was posting kids' work on school walls. Everyone studies the same language? No. Literacy is alphabetic and print-based? Oh, forget it. So here's my line for that. As the static, unidirectional 2D world on paper has disintegrated into dynamic, multidirectional, crowdsourced, cloud-based knowledge construction, individually measurable reading, writing, listening, speaking skills have given way to cognitively distributed problem solving, using a digital toolkit enabling collaborative read-write authoring, plurilingual and multimodal design, ludic and maker pedagogies, even post-human communication with bots. In this wildly changing communication landscape, interdisciplinarity is an essential coping mechanism. So, you know, again, that's a pat on the back for the organization of this wonderful group right here and now. I'm going to just let these kids give you their own story here. This is a book that came out of it was part of an anti-homophobia program because some of the teachers heard the kids using gay slurs and stuff in the playground, and they thought, well, we have to cut this one down. You know, we have to get rid of this. And so we've had a new sex ed come in, and there's strikes, and people are pulling their kids out of school and all kinds of stuff. And it's like, really? You don't think your kids have got access to information? Oh, boy. So anyhow, the idea here was looking at what is the same about people before moving into what is different about people. Because basically, we are just all people. And this is what they came up with. I think my time is really running, so I'm going to just let them give their book to you. Oh, dear.
We all need to eat. We all need to eat. Hepimiz yememiz gerek. We all need friends. Chúng ta cần có bạn. We all have friends. Allah is a giri. We are all smart in our own way. Tất cả chúng tôi rất khôn. நாங்கள் எல்லோரும் தனிப்பட்ட வகையில் அறிவானவர்கள். We all laugh. Tất cả chúng tôi đều cười. We all cry. Chúng ta cùng khóc. We all laugh. Mình hết cười. We all have body parts.
That's just a little sample. It's a very beautiful book that they did, talking book. Last one I better give before moving on to the 2 posthumanism is how to build your own country. This is wonderful, Ray. I love working with her. She's just so much fun. She always finds real small topics like that to work on, you know. So this one was very engaging and very, very interesting. I'm going to do a shortcut to the kind of countries that they created. Here's what you had to do. You had to stake out your own identity, and that's the geopolitics of nation building. These kids are 8 and 9 years old. You had to run your own country, and that means to develop, interpret, and institute constitutional laws. And you had to meet the neighbors, which means you have to develop global diplomacy. And so they had lots of different countries, and some of the countries were pretty silly. This is an example of a fusion country where kids got together, and we have one child who was from Guyana, another one from Ethiopia, another one from India, and so they made Gamath India. And they've got their, you know, their languages and so on. The really most interesting part of this project was Ria was not satisfied that they were getting human disasters on an international scale at all, and they were doing a digital game called IT, which is Haitian Creole and French for Haiti, for the country Haiti. So, and they were kind of wanting to win, no matter if family members died. And so they put them into, and the picture on the left is the picture of a circle game that they did. They did a game where they had 4 tables stratified by resources, and they had to form countries out of them, and they had a particular economy to work with. And they stratified them such that there was a wealthy country, and there were 2 countries that had an acceptable number of resources, but different conditions. One had equal resources for people, another one had wildly kind of different resourcing. And then they made a third world country. They made a country where there were 8 chairs, 12 kids, or 16 kids, yeah. They won their government by an arm wrestling competition. And so we ended up with an apathetic rich country that lost somebody because they couldn't be bothered to work hard enough to actually keep themselves afloat. They had so much of everything. And then on the other hand, the best ones were in the middle. On the other hand, they had this poor country that was a military coup that had instituted slavery with all of the girls on the outside doing all of the labor. All the boys took the chairs. Teachers had their, they were aghast by what was happening. And they continued the cameras rolling, and I have footage, but there's only so much time, and it wasn't directly on language. And their footage has got a revolt on the kind of poor table. So after that, the kids kind of got the idea that governments were important, and you could put in a government that would institute pretty awful inequality. Okay, so this got me thinking about globalization and how children see globalization. And all of these pictures have to do with either Joyce projects or one picture I sneaked in from my colleague Cheryl's granddaughter, Cheryl being the former principal of the school, who, when she was with her grandmother at the zoo, had asked why some animals are stuck to the ground and some are not. And her grandmother had said, well, we live on a ball. And her granddaughter had said, oh, don't be silly, Grandma, we don't live on a ball. So they'd gone home and they'd made Earth and so on and so forth. So I snuck it in here. What you see here is that kids look at working together, at being together, that globalization means kind of being together. And as I move into the third part of my talk, the adult view is something very different, where kind of meat space of what happens in the physical is starting to take the shape of things like Brexit, where this is my space, not your space, kind of stuff. And yet on the sort of digital, in the digital sphere, we've got this is mine, you are mine, I can be imperialistic with this. I mean, it makes sense that it's a commercial space. I mean, that's, that makes sense. But the imperialism that's kind of threaded through it is truly kind of creepy. So we move to posthumanism, and this is via mobile-assisted language learning. So here on the left, we have 20th century models of communication. Old stuff, 4 skills, input, output, and so on. And on the right is a picture I sneakily took on the bus of what I see every day, everywhere, all over the place. And the two don't match very well. So that's a kind of provocative starting point on that. And our lives in our mobile universes that we create for ourselves are not really happening much within schools and so forth, and they're happening in very odd ways outside of school. Now, we interrupt this programming for a little talk on technology. When you stop and you say, well, that's, things are really different now, people will say, oh, it's the technology. And I was at a conference somewhere in Toronto with ministry funding of some sort. So you've got people saying, well, we've got this great we're going to have $15 million to do this in the school system. I'm thinking, $15 million? We work for months to get like $70,000, and you've got $15 million to do what? So they started kind of vaguely talking about things, and I interrupted rudely and asked, what do you mean by technology? And they said, oh, all the new stuff. And I thought, oh, I don't know. I don't really know. So I've been thinking about this a great deal, and this is a launch of the Raspberry Pi, which is a little computer. It's a little joke on the BlackBerry, Poor old BlackBerry. They're gone at this point, pretty much. But anyhow, it's a little electronic spider, and it was held at a college that's part of the, it's sort of connected to the university, to York University, university I work at. And so I went along because I was very interested in it, and everybody was served little raspberry tarts. You know, it's a sort of whole joke on Raspberry Pi, P-I. And they showed this thing, and I'm laughing and talking to my neighbors saying, oh my God, you know, this little wee thing, come on, you're joking. And then they introduced it and said it represented $9 billion worth of coding, at which point I realized that I didn't know what technology was at all. So I went out to find out how other people look at technology. And I started out with people who have got nothing to do with language, people who are engineers, people who are economists, people who are looking at technology from very different vantage points, which I'd highly recommend, by the way. And this is from Biker, who looks at the social construction of technology. And this is one of his quotes. Technology comprises first artifacts and technical systems. Second, the knowledge about these, and third, the practices of handling these artifacts and systems. So you can't really talk about where technology starts and society ends, or anything like that. You can't do it. You can't cut that space up in any kind of convenient way. And that's what I think we're all trying to do in many ways. Okay, let me briefly tell you about some of the fun work I've been doing with MAL, Mobile Assisted Language Learning. And there's a wonderful talk, actually, that I saw from Anthony Alm, I believe the name is, from New Zealand. It was presented this week, and it's in the talks that we can access. And she did a very, very sophisticated autoethnography of herself learning Spanish using a whole suite of apps. It's an extremely interesting talk. So generally speaking, how people have looked at this in the past has been an app-only approach or as design-oriented learning. What she did was designed learning using apps in a very clever way, which I'm going to go back and look at and think about more. But what's taking over very, very much is app-based learning. You can learn just about anything through your phone, and I sort of checked out some of the stuff. You can learn how to break dance if you want to do that. If you're into something a little tamer, you can do napkin folding. You know, there was just amazing sort of array of courses that you could learn. And you could learn languages that, you know, would kind of stretch a lot of people's imagination as to where they're actually spoken. So there's lots of it. I've got a little bit of Busu on the side here right now. Okay, so I wondered what apps were marketed, and here I went back to my ESL roots because I'm interested in apps for all kinds of languages, actually, but you know, you don't get funding for all kinds of languages, so I said English. And I am interested because I think there's potentially a huge market for this, and the people who are doing the selling are not people who are language teachers. They are not, and so you're getting really odd stuff. So I was interested in the epistemologies of language that I found underlying these apps and the pedagogies. Well, this one's going to be really short because, here's my spectrum. I went to a number of places. I looked at, this was during 2015, it must have been, and I got resources, excuse me, from 2013, 2014, 2015. They changed very quickly. You would still see Duolingo in there, though, up at the top. And I did them, and my family members did them, and my class all did them. Everybody got out there, and we all picked apps, and we found languages, and we started to try them all out and see where we could get to. And I'm going to shorthand here, too, the issues. And these are actual screen grabs. So apropos of 4 skills, we've got on the bottom, and this one is a big company, and I'll find it in a minute. Okay, the top one is Duolingo, and here's their test. I'm doing this in German. Which one of these is the dogs? Well, gosh, that's really going to be hard to pick. So they have incredibly low-level testing. And I'm seeing 4 skills stuff out of the bottom. You know, that's what I'm seeing. And I'm thinking, well, but we don't communicate online using them. Why would you teach print conventions online? Why would you do that? What I found were outdated, inadequate learning theories, low-level content, poor achievement tests, tedious repetitive drills. I couldn't get by somebody on one or another of them, for whom I had to say, buonasera. And I said, buonasera. And I never quite got to the point where she'd let me go to the next one. And I thought, hell with you. All right, and that was the end of Italian for that one anyhow. So you got decontextualized vocabulary memorization as well, all testing, no teaching out of some of them. Importing old media competencies was rife. And the one that really bothered me, deprofessionalization of language teaching. Rosetta Stone, that's those guys on the bottom, that's who it is. Rosetta Stone students, this is a quote, is searching for native UK English speakers to facilitate a series of energetic language classes for beginner to advanced students. Do you see teacher in there anywhere? You know, and why native? And the questions go on and on. So then I got really interested. I don't know how involved you are in the world of apps, but there was something in The Guardian the other day about Duolingo's new chatbot. So we have now gone beyond the app to the chatbot, and you will be using a chatbot because you're using, if you use your assistant in your phone for anything, or if you use a GPS and you put a voice on it, you are using a chatbot or something of the same family. Basically, you're talking to a machine, you're talking to a program. And so this becomes a kind of a scary scenario for human cognition, a very scary scenario. I've been wondering for 15 years now how much of human culture we are relegating, human memory and cultural memory, we're relegating to machine memory, to something you could pull a plug on. And I mean, I don't know, I have no idea. But we're in the process of doing it, we really are. Now, on the other hand, it is a potentially interesting new tool to use in language teaching. And let me give you a couple of quotes again. So here's Biker again. Today's societies, we then assume, are thoroughly technological, and all technologies are pervasively cultural. I think we actually heard a little of that today. Technologies do not merely assist in everyday lives, they are also powerful forces acting to reshape human activities and their meanings. It's symbiotic. It is intertwined in ways that can't be unintertwined. And so acronyms like CALL and MOL are problematic because it isn't computer assisted. It's infused all the way. And I think that's a lot of the problem, is thinking that you can somehow make this optional or an add-on. I like what Reinders and Pegram have to say about the app-only learning, which I'm seeing kind of take over. Some educators worry that the kind of active collaborative learning facilitated by Web 2.0 is being eroded by a slick corporatized application of the web, leading to a learning landscape populated by individually purchased, independently used, standalone apps, training limited sets of knowledge and skills. And I'm kind of saying, yeah, we got to listen to this. We really, really, really have to listen to this. So I was playing around with a Venn diagram, and I didn't even dare put either technology there or, in fact, learning, because I just ended up with all the circles kind of going over each other again and again, and you couldn't see anything. But I was trying to think of the terrain that we have in common, or where we put our boundaries. And for me, literacies are not language written down in any way, shape, or form. That creates a subset, yes, and it's not even an independent subset anymore, because in the way that if we look, I mean, historically, you might be able to get away with that, but even then, there were other choices that were made, the kind of material that you actually used to mediate what you had to say, and so on and so forth. So literacies these days no longer are even exclusively human, because we can code machines to talk to machines, and they use bits of code that are human kind of created, but you can't say them, you know, so they're not actually language, not human language anyhow. So we got a really funny overlap there. Human communication, I mean, language is only part of that. We all know that. That's fine. Literate kind of encoding is only part of that as well. Human communication is very, very rich. But our human communication is just, at this point, like we've got some really interesting borders that are starting to be crossed. So I'm going to return to my 6 propositions with some ideas. And all my 6 propositions are some things I thought about at the beginning of the week and some things I thought about at the end of the week. So, I mean, they're open in every way, shape, and form for discussion. So language is a medium for human communication. Language is increasingly a medium for non-human communication too, really increasingly. Humans have an innate capacity for languages, which I still need some convincing that I'm sorry that that's not true. We can teach languages too, though. I mean, everybody here is involved in that in one way, shape, or form. So we can also do that. We are also teaching animals and machines to use human languages. And you know what? Machines are teaching us to learn human languages. And there's a moment to pause and reflect, for sure. 3, languages can be materialized in different technical media, as can non-linguistic communication. Excuse me. Materializing language and non-linguistic human and machine communication has morphed from static print encoding to a plethora of digital forms using technical media that are socially neither optional nor an add-on. They just aren't. There might have been a time in life when people could have been described as illiterate, you know, way centuries and centuries ago. Well, in some places, you might be able to go to people who don't use the kind of encoding we thought of as typically literate. Those people will inevitably be able to read other things, trees, stars, seas, all kinds of other things like that. But I don't think that's impossible anymore. I don't think you can even conceive of that anymore, really. Digitally mediated communication facilitates and extends multimodality and introduces novel conventions. Communication can be variably materialized, yielding multisemiotic, plurilingual, multimodal, dynamic, and interactive texts. And I think that bothers a lot of people. Not necessarily people here, but it certainly doesn't go down well with policymakers, that's for sure. And encoding conventions have changed as part of that. They have very definitely and indelibly changed. We can't be importing the old kind of conventions in an era where we can customize everything. We're not in an era of standardization anymore. We're in an era of customization. Digitally networked communication enables cognitive distribution. Distributed cognition across people and machines in socio-technical networks is seamless and mobile. So the idea that we're not doing it, not part of it, it's something that we can kind of add, I don't think so. Socio-technical evolution outstrips educational policy and practice. Well, yeah, and I'm going to leave you with the question, what are you going to do about that? And with that, I thank you very much.